This has been a story of consistency as well. I could not be more pumped for these two players.
Yeah, these two players, we both heard them on stage talk about they want to demonstrate the strength of Europe as a region. They've already done that. Europe is the only region remaining here at the Hearthstone World Championship. And now it'll just be which of these two players emerges on top.
Indeed, and you can see Shaman ban for both players. They have pretty similar lineups across the board here. And it's time to jump into the action. So ladies and gentlemen, one more time, a round of applause for your World Championship participants. DrHippi versus Pavel, game number 1.
Is the warrior deck for both players. This is one element of their lineup these two players do differ on significantly. While they are both playing warrior, Pavel is playing the much more controlling-oriented Cthulhu warrior. He's looking to build toward a powerful late game, whereas DrHippi is playing dragon warrior. He's looking to get out more aggressively and really put pressure on Pavel and force him to have the right answer at the right time.
Indeed, yeah. The Cthulhu warrior has a little bit of a better matchup versus the Dragon Warrior than the normal version. Oh, and he gets life cap too.
Yeah, that is huge. The Sir Finley Murgleton on turn 1 allows DrHippi to replace his hero power with life tap. And this is a matchup where so much of what the Cthulhu Warrior deck is trying to do is run you out of resources. It tries to use its cards to answer yours, and eventually you just don't have very much left. But life tap will allow DrHippi to use his life total as a resource and exchange that for cards. The Cthulhu Warrior deck doesn't pressure you very much at all. You can really life tap at will in this matchup.
Yeah, it does pressure you a little bit. It pressures more than normal Control Warrior with cards like Cthulhu's Chosen, with the 7 drops that they have, Twin Emperor Veclor, and the Ancient Shield Bearer, but definitely not as much. And DrHippi actually has a pretty solid curve. He also has a cheap Dragon and Fairy Dragon, so if he draws any of his Dragon activation cards like Twilight Guardian or Blackwing Corruptor, he'll be okay.
Look at how fast Pavel plays. And this is a player we've seen playing here, literally the biggest match of his life, the biggest match that has ever happened in Hearthstone. This is the biggest prize ever being given out, and he is just playing lightning fast. It's the player who kind of seems to play on instinct.
Yeah, and we actually noticed backstage when we were talking that Pavel actually plays better when he plays fast. He slowed down his play yesterday and had some, crucial errors in some of his matches. But now he's playing faster. He's playing to that instinct, and he's sort of trusting in that instinct. So it'll be interesting to see if that pays off for him now in the finals.
And he does have that Cthulhu's Chosen on turn 4 to get a little bit developed on the board, but DrHippi has a really good possible turn of his own. He can answer that pretty easily with Fiery War Axe if he wants to. He does want to think about the possibility of potentially overextending into Brawl. He doesn't just want to play out a bunch of minions and allow Pavel to clear out all of them with his Brawl, but that Fiery War Axe, which it looks like he is debating playing right here, along with Sir Finley to take out the Divine Shield, will allow him to clear that to Cthulhu's Chosen and just keep up the pressure with this board. So Alex Strauss's champion comes down, charging forward, and speaking of charging forward, that Berserker is doing a lot of damage as well.
Oh yeah, I mean, he's put Pavel down sub 20 health already. One thing to notice is by trading in Sir Finley, he also makes his board a little bit better against Brawl. And Pavel shield blocks, but doesn't find anything to remove this damage off the board. So he's going to take a lot going into this next turn.
And this is one of the things that kind of makes the Cthulhu Warrior a bit different than a lot of the other warrior decks. It does have the ability to be proactive, a powerful, in some ways, inevitable endgame with Cthulhu, but so many expensive cards can just clog up your hand. Pavel has a handful of the Shield Bearer, the Cthulhu, the Justicar, the Doomsayer. These are cards that are powerful. The game gets to go a long time, but DrHippi is not looking to make that happen. He's just putting on the pressure right now.
And you also lack a little bit of the hard removal that traditional control warriors tend to have, like the Bash. But look at this, DrHippi purposefully putting Pavel on 13 health.
Yeah, this is a crucial decision because of Revenge. Revenge, if Pavel were to go down to 12, could do 3 damage to the entire board rather than just 1. And DrHippi with a very heads-up play of ensuring that he puts the maximum damage on Pavel without actually allowing him to get the max value of that Revenge.
Yeah, so DrHippi, I believe, is sitting 2 damage off of lethal at the time being, with 12 on the board, 15 from the Fireworks, and 3 from the Alex champion. It puts him at 18 total damage. He just needs 2 more to push it all the way, and he's actually putting below 12. This is the push that he needs. He realizes he can probably get Pavel low enough and has enough gas behind this to make it even through a Revenge.
Yeah, this Brawl, too. We just saw the Horcrux Elite picked up for DrHippi. He has so much damage coming through, and I don't think there's any way Pavel lives through this. He's down to 8, and there's 2 chargers plus that War Axe remaining. Pavel doesn't know it, but this is going to be his last turn of this game 1.
Oh yeah, and I mean, this is just sometimes what the Cthulhu Warrior can struggle with. If it doesn't draw any of its removal and draws too many of its minions, if it falls behind on board, it has a very tough time catching up. The brawl came late, the removal never came, and DrHippi was able to pressure enough to bring it home. Pavel's thinking of what his best chance is to survive. Dragon Warrior doesn't necessarily have too many buffs, so killing it is usually the same amount of health as letting it live.
Yeah, but we see the Corcon Elite going to come down, and DrHippi will take game 1 of the World Championship Final.
Fast and furious as well, as both players playing at a pretty fast speed. But we'll see if Pavel can bring it together and tie up the series as we move into game number 2 right after this.
3 games, give them false hope. Is that how it works?
That's exactly how it works, Brian Kibler. But one card that has been Pavel's best friend over the course of the BlizzCon main stage has been Babbling Book in this Tempo Mage. Pavel has put up some crazy performances with his Tempo Mage deck, and we'll see if he can do just that against one of the decks that it has the most trouble against, and that's the Zoo Warlock from DrHippi.
Yeah, the Zoo deck is able to get out on the board very quickly and force the Tempo Mage deck to react fast. One of the things that, kind of a misnomer considering its name, the Tempo Mage deck would prefer to have time. It likes to actually have time to build up resources, build up a hand, build up mana, so it can have big turns with Flamewaker and lots of spells.
Basically, it needs one turn in the game where it can develop its own minions while clearing the board in order to, you know, be able to answer every threat that the Zoo Warlock can play, which can be pretty tough, though.
Yeah, but this is actually already working out pretty well for Pavel here. The Malchezaar's Imp is answered immediately by a coined-out Cult Sorcerer. And, well, generally, you do want to hold onto that coin because it lets you have those explosive turns with Flamewaker. Against Zoo, you can't waste time. You really want to get out there and threaten their minions on the board. And the Malchezaar's Imp is actually a very high-value minion. So if Pavel were to... if Pavel weren't able to, or first to kill it with some sort of spell here, he does pick up a Arcane Missiles and a Ice Lance from that Babbling Book. So not really a great use yet. The Ice Lance could combine with Frostbolt to do enough damage to actually take out a big threat like a Doomguard, though.
Yeah, also something like a Darkshire Councilman or anything buffed by Defender of Argus, things like that. It is, you know, a lot of resources to use. And that's one thing that Tempo Mage can struggle with is sometimes they can even get ahead on the early board, but fall behind in card advantage because of the life tap.
And DrHippi, with the Discover here of his Dark Peddler, finds a few interesting options. The Soulfire has to be at least somewhat attractive because his board and hand doesn't have very many ways to deal with any significant threat, but he does take the Villager. Villager allows him to have a good defense, at least somewhat, against Flamewaker, but it's not that effective, so I'm a little bit surprised to see that choice, but the, perfect missiles there from Pavel ends up taking out DrHippi's entire board and leaving him with the only threats.
Yeah, the double spell power missiles gives him a lot of room to maneuver on this early board. Pavel also has a very minion-heavy Tempo Mage deck with Water Elemental, and with the Faceless Summoner as well.
Yeah, and that Imp Gang Boss, that's one of the most important cards for the Zoo deck against Tempo Mage. Imp Gang Boss, because it does spawn imps whenever it's damaged, is particularly resilient against Flamewaker pings, against Arcane Missiles, and at least requires awkward use of mana and pings in order to get off the board, even with single target removal like Frostbolt.
Also against just the minions that Tempo Mage has. I mean, all of their minions have like 3 attack, which is right below the threshold of one-shotting that Imp Gang Boss. Now, Pavel does have a way to sort of cleanly deal with it with Frostbolt plus a ping now that he has spell power on the board, but his minions are challenged by that possessed villager, and he wouldn't be developing Water Elemental, which would be the strongest play you can make on the board this turn.
Yeah, and that possessed villager pickup from the Dark Peddler is working out very well for DrHippi. You know, it did allow him to play these out to the board here, and the Cult Sorcerer, like you mentioned, still challenged, even if Pavel's able to use his removal to clear off the Imp Gang Boss, thanks to the extra body.
Well, he's going to evaluate his draw, but Pavel is running out of time, so he doesn't have much time to think. He's probably already thought the return. Flame Strike may not be a good pickup now, but that's one of those cards that can help you swing a board later on in the match.
And the cost reduction from Sorcerer's Apprentice allows Pavel to use Ice Lance just to buy time. This isn't going to damage the Imp Gang boss, it's not frozen, but it does protect both of his minions here. But DrHippi has a pretty big moment of his own. Doomguard with a silver... Oh, and it does! The Silverware Golem does come down. He discards it, goes directly into play. A massive tempo swing for DrHippi. He gets both the 5/7 charge and the 3/3 on the board right away.
And he holds on to the Crazed Alchemist. I'm actually not sure which one's better in that situation, to discard Crazed or the Voidwalker, because Voidwalker can do wonders in sort of protecting a more powerful minion from the face of other minions on the opposing side of the board.
I think that Cursed Alchemist is going to work out really well right here, though. It'll allow DrHippi to swap his Imp Gang boss to kill that Azure Drake, allowing him to keep his Doomguard in play. So this could be a pretty powerful swing from DrHippi. Oh, or there's the Soulfire.
Yeah, now he can use his minions to push damage. He can still Crazed Alchemist his Imp Gang boss if he wants to push.
One really interesting thing is he has the Crazed Alchemist plus the Abusive Sergeant interaction here. Because the Crazed Alchemist effect is permanent, it will flip and retain the attack you give with the Abusive Sergeant as health. So you could potentially Abusive Sergeant his Doomguard, then Crazed Alchemist it, so you can attack for 7, then flip it to be a 4/7 if he wants.
And those would be permanent stats because of the interaction, something we saw with Direwolf Alpha earlier on in the tournament as well.
And this allows DrHippi to not only clear off all of Pavel's board incredibly efficiently, but have a super strong Doomguard left over. That Doomguard was damaged, and it was potentially in range of, say, Flame Strike, which Pavel does in his hand, which could he cast next turn. So a huge, huge interaction for DrHippi there.
Yeah, definitely, and it was at that 4 health, like you mentioned, 4 Flame Strike. Pavel, though, does have some pretty decent cards in his hand. Water Elemental's very resilient on the board. Flame Waker plus Arcane Intellect can draw you a lot of those cheap spells that can allow you to push back on the board. Pavel, though, looks like he's just setting up for the Flame Strike here.
Yeah, he does have the ability to clear off DrHippi's board next turn, and Hippie, drawing a couple of fairly low-impact cards here, he is in kind of an awkward spot. He does know that it at least looks like Pavel is setting up for Flame Strike. He, of course, knows that there's a Flame Strike in Pavel's deck, so he's probably trying to figure out exactly what he can do to maneuver around this, or if he doesn't feel like he can afford to play around it at all and just wants to deploy his hand.
Indeed, yeah. So DrHippi, you know, he has to realize that that Flame Strike is definitely a huge possibility. That Frostbolt on the Doomguard is not a play you make very often. It could block that 5 damage. It could act, or start at the 4 damage now that it's been flipped. And it could act as sort of a heal, but you sort of know what's coming in the back of your head, and this is going to be a big swing for Pavel.
All right, yeah, Hippie is just saying, all right, if you got Flame Strike, you've got Flame Strike, and you know what? Pavel's got Flame Strike. A huge clear of Hippie's entire board, and now Pavel is firmly in the driver's seat.
Yeah, you can't really blame DrHippi for that one. I mean, at that point, Flame Strike is usually going to mean you lose the game anyway. So you kind of have to act like he doesn't have that, because that's the best play he can make to the board should Pavel not have the Flame Strike. Yeah. So you can't really blame him for going and extending into that spell there.
Yeah, the ability to identify when you can afford to play around something and when you have to just let your opponent beat you if they have it is a crucial thing for top-level players. And Hippie looks at the situation, evaluates, yeah, you know what, I'd probably lose to Flame Strike. If you have it, you have it. And Pavel truly gets the best of him with that. And being getting the best of him, Flame Waker getting the best of that entire board, and Hippie with no cards and just 10 life. This game's all but over.
Yeah, I mean, when it rains, it pours as far as Hearthstone goes. DrHippie's going to stay in the game just to maybe, you know, think of what deck he's going to queue up next, but this game is over as Pavel with the fireball to the face is going to take game number 2. And this is a big one, Kibler, because this was a poor matchup for him going in.
Yeah, this was definitely not a matchup he was looking to get, but he was able to make the best of it when he did, and is able to take the series to a tied score of 1-1 here in the finals. Look at that crowd. We have, looks like every single seat is now going into game number 3, Druid versus Druid. It's a deck we've seen a lot of. It's a deck that every single player brought to the World Championship, but hasn't necessarily been the best performing deck.
No, especially against Pavel.
Yeah.
Druid against Pavel has an abysmal win rate. He 4-0'd both Omega Zero at opening week and Amnesiac here on the BlizzCon main stage. So DrHippi, he's got to be pretty scared of what's in store for him with this Druid deck.
Yeah, Pavel has had an excellent track record of keeping nature down. Has not risen against him very much. But we'll see who is the master of nature here. As DrHippi mulligans into what looks like a pretty bad hand.
Yeah, he does have Azure Drake, though. That's one of the good cards in the mirror. He does have removal. But Pavel has Wild Growth. He has Fandral. He has Mire Keeper. That hand is looking much better than DrHippi's.
Yeah, Pavel has the ability to ramp multiple times. This is a matchup that will often come down to just getting big threats in play that stick. And it's difficult for the Druid to really remove big threats because most of the Druid removal is based on damage. We see the swipes and Moonfires, Wraths. And if you are able to stick an Arcane Giant, if you're able to stick Ragnaros the Fire Lord, it can be very, very difficult for the other player to come back.
Yeah, one thing to note about the differences between these guys' deck is Pavel, as we've seen over the course of the championship, has those Dark Arakoas at that 6th slot in his decks, where, you know, DrHippi doesn't. I believe he has an extra copy of something, and he has Baron Geddon as well.
Yeah, it is worth noting many players chose to play Ancient of War. Ancient of War is generally accepted sort of the big taunt minion that you play in ramp-style Druid decks, but Pavel disagrees. He wants something that comes down a little bit faster, doesn't rely on him ramping quite as much, but still offers a big taunt body, and it's gotten him very far with that.
Yeah, he's been able to fill his curve quite nicely with those 6 drops, but now, I mean, he has Mire Keeper now to even ramp further towards whatever he may draw in the future. One thing you see, doesn't really have plays lined up for the future unless DrHippi were to develop something. If he Mire Keepers this turn, then he could go with something like Fandral Wrath into a potential Mire Keeper for DrHippi on the following turn.
And Pavel definitely taking his time here. We've seen Pavel play very fast in most of his games throughout this tournament, but he is taking his time. Druid is a deck that can often have a lot of options because between cards like Innervate and the modal cards like Wrath, you have a lot of different ways you can piece together your turns.
Yeah, DrHippi is going to ramp, but he just doesn't have too much substance to his hand. He's got Azure Drake as his only minion. He's got plenty of removal, but that's going to force him to sort of play reactively for most of the game, unless he picks up big minions to play very quickly.
Pavel's going to go ahead and play his Azure Drake rather than play Fandral. This does set him up pretty directly into a swipe from DrHippi here. I think he may be trying to get more value out of Fandral, perhaps trying to set up Fandral with Raven Idol in order to get card advantage.
Could also try and set it up with Feral Rage. Feral Rage is usually a tool that is used to remove Azure Drakes and Mire Keepers in this matchup, and health can matter a lot when we get to the later turns because of Malagos.
It's also possible that he's trying to save the Fandral plus Wrath specifically for an Azure Drake.
Yeah.
Because the spell power from Azure Drake is extremely important with the number of damaging spells that are in the Malagos Druid deck, and he can line that up pretty specifically in order to answer the Drake.
Yeah, and at the moment, he doesn't have any other way to answer in Azure Drake, where he did have the way on the board to answer the Mire Keeper. So definitely planning ahead here for Pavel, it seems.
Starfire takes that, and there's a Raven Idol. So immediately for Pavel, he is rewarded for his patience with Fandral, and is able to get a double discover with his Raven Idol here. That takes pretty much just the highest impact minion available. This is a matchup that can come down to just who has a big thing. None of those were big, but Mount Raptor's the biggest.
Yeah, one thing that gets a little bit interesting as this game moves on is that neither of these decks packs hard removal, but they all have big threats of their own. So it comes down to sort of a war of giants later on. If you can, you know, be the first one to play giants, if your opponent doesn't have removal for it, you get a big initiative. But at the same time, if you do have removal for your opponent's giants, that puts you at a big advantage.
And Pavel's going to go ahead and coin out that Raptor here. It does make his board a little bit awkward for Hippie to deal with. The swipe plus hero power will be able to take out the Fandral, but not necessarily take out the Raptor as well. But he does have the ability to innervate out swipe with the spell power now from that Drake. And that can take out both of them, but it will leave a minion behind thanks to the death rattle of the Raptor.
Yeah. We'll see what it is. Usually not impactful.
Oh, Angry Chicken in the World Championship Finals. Let's hear for Angry Chicken.
That's a lot of Angry Chicken fans.
I mean, who isn't an Angry Chicken fan?
Great
Think
point.
about it.
Yeah. Well, Pavel has some interesting options here. With the Angry Chicken, it allows him to Wrath. He could Wrath, Innervate, Arcane Giant. I believe he had enough mana to do that.
Ooh! Cairn comes out of the Moonglade portal.
Pavel is the master of portals.
He has had some excellent portal results this weekend. Usually you think of Cairn hanging out in Thunderbluff, but I guess he was visiting Moonglade. I was just like, all right, I'll come hang out too.
This is actually huge. The Cairn from the Moonglade portal means that Pavel is almost guaranteed to have something on the board going into the next turn. One thing to note though, DrHippi does draw the Malagos, and as we talked about earlier, this deck does lack hard removal. So if you can just slam a Malagos on the board, clear it, your opponent usually doesn't have a direct answer for it unless they got something from Raven Idol or they have a ton of damage spells in their hand.
And you know, DrHippi kind of in the tank here, trying to figure out what he's going to do against this Cairn. Looks like he's just going to use a lot of resources to deal with it. Going to go ahead and swipe plus face tank with Scape Shift.
That is very tough to swallow if you're DrHippi, having to use multiple removal spells to remove that 6-drop from the board, and Pavel's just going to keep the train rolling, nourish to get himself some more cards, more spells, more removal.
Innervate a Giant. It's down to 6 already.
Well, yeah.
Yep, there it is. So Pavel on the board with an Arcane Giant and still Bane Bloodhoof. So he has a lot of pressure here. It's not going to be easy for DrHippi to answer.
No, he does have Yogg-Saron. It's still a turn away, and actually it's relatively early in the game. He hasn't casted too many spells so far. But it is sort of that wild card in this matchup. Both players have it in their deck. There was a lot of players in opening week who chose not to bring Yogg-Saron, and there was sort of a mix and match. Some players got rid of it, some players put it back in. A lot of players are still undecided on whether or not that card is worth it in their competitive decks because of its inconsistency.
Yogg-Saron is a card that, prior to the change, was very effective at generating resources because you could draw a lot of cards, put a lot of secrets in play, even if Yogg-Saron did end up killing itself. But now it's pretty much only a card that's good when you're behind in a game, and even then isn't reliable in terms of a way to answer your opponent's threats. But for Druid in particular, Ramp Druid, you could often really struggle to deal with a big board, and Yogg-Saron offers the ability to do that in worst case scenario.
Yeah, and DrHippi uses the Nourish to try and draw into some more removal. But the thing here is Pavel's just going to keep generating threats. And while Druids can sometimes deal with one big threat, a full board of big threats cannot be dealt with very easily.
I'm actually a little surprised to see this snap Emperor Tharson from Pavel here, because DrHippi just used Feral Rays to just gain armor. That is about as much as you can telegraph the fact that you're about to play Yogg-Saron, as I can imagine. But Pavel does get the discount on Swipe and Living Roots. That does make his own Malagos win condition much more powerful later on. So if DrHippi does choose to go with Yogg-Saron this turn, it will be a 7-spell Yogg-Saron. We see he just drew a 5-cost Arcane Giant. A little bit of math there.
He can make it more. Yep. It looks like he's going to make it at least 8. He's not going to use Moonfire and Living Roots, though, but this is an 8-spell Yogg-Saron.
Right. Bow down to the god of death. Whose hopes are ending here?
Uh-oh. Innervate.
Oh, Ancestral Spirit.
Oh, no! Another Innervate. Tracking. Now, keep in mind, tracking can actually skip over his Malagos that's in his deck. So there may no longer be a Malagos in DrHippi.
Fortunately for DrHippi, he does have it in his hand.
Well,
so
it could skip over a big minion.
This is actually incredible. DrHippi killed nothing. He actually resolved the entire Yogg and nothing died. In fact, he just gave Emperor Tharson another life. He did remove his ability, but that was absolutely not what he needed from that Yogg-Saron. Yeah. There's 17 damage on board. I think Pavel just has lethal here pretty clearly from his hand.
Oh yeah, that's a lot of spells.
Oh yeah, this is just going to be it. So Yogg does not answer DrHippi's prayers, and Pavel takes the lead 2-1.
Impressive stuff from Pavel. Gets the first threats on the board, and Yogg-Saron is not enough to stop him in his tracks. This is one of the first times we've actually seen Pavel ahead in a series, Kibler.
Yeah, he is, you know, in the drive. Curtain here, but we are ready. These players are clothed and into game 4. It will be Pavel with his Cthulhu Warrior deck that he failed to win with moments ago against DrHippi, going with try number 2 with his Druid.
Yeah, now this one is another tough matchup for Druid. Cthulhu Warrior can pressure early, or earlier than normal Control Warrior can. They also have an absurd amount of life gain, which can make the win condition of Malagos plus spells very difficult for the Druid.
Yeah, the way that the Druid generally beats most Control Warrior decks is just kind of attritioning their removal. You just play card draw like Nourish, you play big threat after big threat, and eventually the Warrior runs out of ways to kill your guys. But Cthulhu Warrior not only has a bunch of ways to kill your guys, but has a bunch of ways to kill you. And Pavel's gonna be looking to put the pressure on himself. Not with this hand, though. This hand is a little slow for Pavel.
No, he doesn't have any of those Cthulhu activators. He doesn't have Cthulhu Chosen, Beckoner of Evil, well, Disciple of Cthulhu. But as I say it, he draws one still a little bit of a ways away from activating the Twin Emperor of Eklor or the Ancient Shield Bearer in his deck.
Yeah, but Pavel does have the Acolyte of Pain shield block, the ability to cycle through his deck. I would not be surprised to see that Acolyte of Pain come down and then Disciple of Cthulhu used on his own Acolyte of Pain to draw cards. There aren't that many targets to kill with Disciple of Cthulhu's Battle Cry in this matchup, so you can often use it in combination with Acolyte to ensure you get additional card draw.
A lot of the times it's just used to activate Execute or maybe to get closer to being able to allow Shield Slam to kill off a minion, so those types of things are not the greatest uses. So drawing a card is actually fantastic, considering that this matchup, you need that card draw because Druids are going to get those cards and get that mana very quickly. But one crucial thing is DrHippi missed Wild Growth again. So he's not going to have that sort of mana advantage as much as he'd like. He can still coin out the Mire Keeper here, and it looks like that's exactly what he's going to do.
Yeah, Mire Keeper will get DrHippi a little bit closer to his bigger spells, so he'll be able to get it to 5 for either Nourish or Azure Drake next turn. And yeah, this will allow Pavel to use that Disciple as removal, cycling through his Acolyte, so not getting 2 cards, but still able to get the removal effect at least of the Disciple and powering up his Cthulhu as well. One thing that's worth noting about DrHippi's specific build of Druid is that he's playing a build of Druid that's much more designed to be good against aggressive decks and not nearly as good against Control Warrior. Many versions of Druid we see with Ancient of War or Ragnaros the Fire Lord. DrHippi has neither. He has a copy of Barongeddon and a copy of Bloodmage Thalnos. That leaves him much more vulnerable to the attrition plan of just removing each of his big threats.
Yeah, which is unlike the deck we just saw from Pavel, who didn't run those anti-aggro cards and decided to run Dark Arakoa as threats that he could play on curve. Dark Arakoa sort of serves a double purpose, though, and that it can also be good against aggro. But going back to this match as well, Pavel just throws down the second Acolyte of Pain, so he's going to be able to cycle through his deck quite effectively. DrHippi, that's a hand full of spells.
And that's Wild Growth. Wild Growth not on time. He wanted those a few turns ago. I would not be surprised to see DrHippi hold on to certainly at least one of those until he does get to 10 mana. But it looks like he's going to go ahead and ramp a little bit and then clear off what he can of Pavel's board. He wants to deny Pavel from getting additional card draws from this Acolyte, so he's going to expend resources dealing with it here.
Whoa, Cthulhu's Chosen, drawn from Pavel right on time. That allows him to get up to that 10-10 Cthulhu, activates Twin Emperor of Eklor. Druids can sometimes have trouble dealing with 2 4/6s on 7, and Pavel slams the Sylvanas. This is a little bit interesting, actually, because Sylvanas has tons of powerful uses in this matchup in particular.
Yeah, Sylvanas is particularly strong when you play it into big minions from your opponent, like, for instance, if DrHippi had Arcane Giant. But Pavel knows that there aren't that many big minions in DrHippi's deck. It's essentially just Arcane Giants and Malagos, but if your opponent's getting a turn with Malagos, you've got something wrong going on.
Yeah.
So here I think that he just wants to throw DrHippi's curve off as much as possible, force him to deal with this Sylvanas right now.
Also, one big exclusion from DrHippi's deck is Ragnaros, the Fire Lord, which is also one of the uses that you can save Sylvanas for in order to try and make an awkward situation from your opponent. So Pavel also knows that he's going to be able to curve into quite a few good plays over the next coming turn. So if he makes DrHippi's turns awkward now, he might be able to put himself in a better position as he moves forward.
And DrHippi, has a pretty good Nourish here, finds his Malagos. So now he's going to be looking to assemble enough damaging spells to just burst Pavel down. Pavel has not been able to really gain any significant amount of armor yet, so he actually has none. And he doesn't have any shield bearers in his hands, so he is really actually kind of in more risk of just getting burned down than you generally expect a Cthulhu Warrior to be at this stage of the game.
Yeah, now he is going to be able to develop something powerful. He'll probably just Cthulhu's Chosen he can actually just, if he really wants to, just equip Gore Howl, because there is no weapon removal from DrHippi's deck. He does not run Harrison Jones if he wanted to be super mana efficient, but being proactive with a Cthulhu's Chosen and making so he has the option to Twin Emperor Veclor next turn can actually be a big deal.
Oh, and this is a pretty aggressive play from Pavel here, choosing to use his Disciple of Cthulhu. This isn't even to put his Cthulhu to 10. Often if you see someone just fire off Disciple of Cthulhu, it's like, okay, I'm gonna enable my Cthulhu cards. But here he is just, again, kind of trying to force DrHippi to react to his board, spend spells, dealing with these things, and not just sit back and armor up and try and tank things out. That's much more difficult to manage when your opponent's drawn as many cards as DrHippi has.
If he can force out removal spells that later on in the game could end up going face with Malygos, then he could put himself in a good position where he doesn't need as much life gain. But now he doesn't have that. I guess he drew into an Execute Activator if he were to draw into Execute with Ravaging Ghoul. But now he doesn't have that extra 2 damage on demand, so we'll see if he's going to pay off for him.
Ooh. Wisps of the Old Gods, an option for DrHippi. Another Nourish. He's already played one, has another in his hand, so kind of difficult to make use of that much card draw. You can actually often end up fatiguing yourself if you go for too many Nourishes in a game against a Control Warrior who's just run out of actual threats. But does take the Wisps of the Old Gods. That can give him the ability to generate a big board that Pavel may be forced to use Brawl or Ravaging Ghoul. And if he does have to use his Ravaging Ghoul, he may not have a way to enable Execute later on when he needs it.
Yeah, sometimes the Control Warrior versus Druid matchup can come down to fatigue situations where both players are trying to run each other out of resources. Cthulhu Warrior is less likely because, you know, of course, Cthulhu Warrior does have Cthulhu to play on the board, which is usually ends the game in one form or another. But Pavel goes ahead and plays a Twin Emperor Veclor. There is a board already for DrHippi, so he's already a little bit of the ways there in regards to clearing off these 4/6s, which are usually pretty awkward for Druids to deal with.
Well, there's a way to deal with it if he wants. Yogg-Saron comes off the top of the head for DrHippi. Did not go so well for him last game, though, so he also does, as you mentioned, have a bit of a board himself. He could potentially just use his minions plus swipe. He'd have to commit a little bit more than just the swipe and hero power, though, because those are 4/6.
Yeah. Now, one thing that may not be relevant in this matchup, but could be relevant in the matchups to come is that Yogg-Saron does affect Malygos.
It's true.
Or Malygos affects Yogg-Saron. So if Malygos is on the board and Yogg-Saron is played, all of the spells that Yogg-Saron casts get that spell power benefit. So sometimes I've seen it happen in Cthulhu Warrior matchups before. A lot of times Malygos doesn't live to tell the tale, but here we go. Finding ways to use that Wisps of the Old Gods.
Yeah, and this does allow DrHippi to leverage that in such a way that it doesn't allow it to just get countered by a Ravaging Ghoul or a Revenge. And now Pavel, he can clear this off with either one of those, the Ravaging Ghoul or Revenge, plus the attack of his minion. It is a little bit awkward, though, because he'd love to be able to actually keep the pressure on with that Emperor.
He can use Revenge plus Gore Howl to clear it off.
It's true.
Be more mana efficient, but I don't know how much use Revenge is going to have later on in the match. There's not really many 3 health minions that you'll need to kill once you get sub 12 health in this matchup. A lot of times it can help you reach Malygos if you need that damage, but that's about it.
The Ancient Shield Bearer is the draw for Pavel, and he already has Bran Bronzebeard in his hand, so DrHippi, he's been setting up with those burn spells plus Malygos, but Pavel is finding the armor gain to get himself very far out of range.
Yeah, Arcane Giant picked up for DrHippi, so that's a big threat that he can use. I'm wondering when DrHippi is going to decide to use that Yogg-Saron. There's 2 ways you can look at it. You can play it as another big threat in your deck to reduce the risk that you discard your hand or that you draw too many cards and fatigue yourself. Or you can try and play it as a win condition very late in the game after you casted all of your spells to try and go for a last-ditch effort against Warriors to maybe sneak out a win.
Yeah, Yogg's a lot worse the latter of those nowadays, though, because if there's nothing on the board, you could just Yogg and, oops, purified it. I'm dead.
And we did see a Yogg-Saron purified in the group stages, so it can happen, and a lot of times it will happen.
Yeah, and then DrHippi, though, he has the Arcane Giant. Ooh. Pavel actually is going right ahead, though. He picked up the Execute and not really wasting any time to just double Ancient Shield Bearer here. I'm somewhat surprised to see this, actually, because he does lose some of the value of the armor gain because the opponent can just immediately attack and deal so much damage. and does have a minion to contest either of these minions on the board as well.
Yeah, the Brand plus Ancient Shield Bearer is not really going anywhere.
Right.
Is the thing. He can wait for that. He's not in any danger. Now that he's seen Innervate, now that he's seen, hasn't seen Emperor Thorsan, there's not really any combination of cards that could have killed him in that position if he had just had removed the Arcane Giant and waited. But I guess he realized that he wants to put threats on the board right now to try and make DrHippi's turns maybe a little bit worse.
All right, well, DrHippi's gonna dig some more. Ooh, picks up Fandral with a Raven Idol. That can be a pretty big way for him to gain additional threats later on. We were talking about how he can run the risk of just having all of his major threats exhausted, but the Raven Idol plus Fandral can pick up maybe something like Force of Nature plus a minion, and that could be a very big deal in that kind of game.
Oh yeah, it can give you that gas that you need to finish out a game, but whoa, this is getting a little awkward for Pavel.
Pavel does not have a Shield Slam, and there's 2 8/8s on the board. He could go for a Brawl that could go very badly for him. Unlikely to go very well. He has a 1 in 3 of things going very well, but he could effectively trade his 6/6 for an 8/8, most likely if he did Brawl. But yeah, he's just kind of running low on relevant removal effects and is in a bit of a pickle.
Oh yeah, he doesn't have Cthulhu either to present his own threat on the board. Not that it'd even be good in this situation. I believe it's at a 12-12 right now. He's not even at a low enough life total to, say, Gorehowl and Revenge. I don't know, maybe he just has to remove one of these and hope that he finds a way to deal with the next one next turn. But that Execute is premium removal. If he uses that Execute now and Malagos comes out, he's in trouble.
Here's the Brawl. There's a chance this goes very well for Pavel. Oh, it does! Shield Bearer survives the Brawl. That is absolutely huge for Pavel.
Pavel is on fire today. Not much can stop this man, not even DrHippi, but still a lot of threats that DrHippi can present, and he might even be able to find more with this Fandral plus Raven Idol.
Oh. Klaxi Amber Weaver. Pavel would love one of those.
Yeah, that'd be pretty good. Lord of the Arena, though, is just the most powerful.
Another Raven Idol. He's just going off, comboing off here.
That's also another cheap spell that he can use to fuel the Yoxeron.
But the scary thing for DrHippi here is because that Shield Bearer survived and got a hit in, he's taken a lot of damage. Oh, Medivh the Guardian, that is a very powerful card if the game does go long.
Wow, Medivh the Guardian. His big spells left in his deck. I mean, he's got Mark of the Wild. I mean, in general right now, that's just a big mini that he can place on the board. The extra stuff that he gets from the spell is sort of just a side thing.
Right, and DrHippi, we've seen this before. He Pharaoh Raged, went face. This is the look of a man who's looking to Yogg.
Oh yeah. I mean, there is another option for DrHippi, should he so choose, next turn with Malagos plus, 2 of those cheap spells, Moonfire plus Living Roots, and, Pavel, he probably feels like he wants to go aggressive here, but leaving Fandral on the board can sometimes be a rough situation. But he's already seen a lot of the cards that he gets high value with.
This is actually kind of a serious situation. Oh, we are going to see the Doomcaller. I was going to say, if he did just go face with this Shield Bearer and Hippie casts Yogg next turn, if he takes any damage from Yogg, if, for instance, there's a Hellfire, Gorehowl's just lethal.
That is very true. And so now DrHippi is on the ropes. Let's see what he's going to go with. He's got Malagos, Moonfire, and Living Roots. He could clear the board with those. The Fandral would have to trade it to the Doomcaller in order to do so. And Malagos would be on the board, which would mean like a Cthulhu would not kill him because he'd have enough health presented on the board with minions to survive unless all of the shots were to go face or a lot, which is very, very unlikely.
And because DrHippi has gotten the double Raven Idol off and he picked up Medivh, he picked up Lord of the Arena, he can try and play an attrition game, even if this Malagos just gets killed. He's not reliant on just using these. A little bit of a misstep from DrHippi here. He actually uses...
Maybe not.
No, he's playing around Brawl.
Yeah.
Actually, maybe not a misstep at all. This looks on the surface, you think about it initially, oh, missed 2 minions. But this means there's only Malagos in play. So a Brawl from Pavel does nothing.
Yeah, very good point. Very good point. He's forcing Pavel to have direct removal, whether it be a Shield Slam because he has the armor for it, or that Execute. And one thing about Ancient Shield Bearer is it's also just a big threat. It's a 6/6. It's something that DrHippi has to deal with. And Pavel saw that DrHippi didn't really struggle, but used a lot of resources to kill the last one, the last board.
And Pavel here with Gorehowl, though, able to take down Malagos and still have that Gorehowl equipped. And that Gorehowl can represent damage either to remove a big minion or just go to Hippie's face. If he does find Cthulhu, it could be pretty big. But DrHippi, he discovered Medivh and Mark of the Wild in the same Raven Idol. He's actually able to generate a 9/9 taunt and a 2-drop minion.
A 2-mana minion.
This is,
if it's Doomsayer,
well protected here. Oh God.
Oh no.
Don't say it, TJ, don't say it.
Okay. Just a Dustboar.
Just a Dustboar.
Oh, I'm so sorry.
4/1. You don't get much more attack than that in a 2-mana minion.
That's
very
true.
Frankly, Pavel has no easy to remove it. Dustboar's in this situation actually fantastic.
It's going to shred some armor for sure. And DrHippi, this is not a hand you see very often for Malagos Druid, a deck that's majority spells, and he's got majority minions, and they're big minions to boot.
Yeah, and now DrHippi very much in the driver's seat. He can just play this slow. Yeah, he has so many of these powerful tools. He is, unfortunately for him, at very low life though, so he needs to be careful to maneuver around the threat of Cthulhu coming down for Pavel.
Yeah, and it's going to be interesting because he doesn't have any way to answer the Cthulhu other than Yogg-Saron. So he's going to be, and I don't even know if he has a Raven Idol. If he got one Raven Idol from the first Raven Idol, and he got
Tiny Finn at the World Championship Finals. Let's hear it for Murloc Tiny Finn.
Maybe he'll live up to his dream of being able to provide lethal damage for his owner.
Pavel is clearly brawling next turn. Will the Tiny Finn win the brawl?
Oh, that's the big question. Here it is.
Oh! Medivh is the winner. Tiny Finn goes down, and Pavel looks like he might be going down to the Guardian himself.
DrHippi's still not out of the woods yet. He's got a lead, or what appears to be a lead in this series. But there are some crucial draws still left in Pavel's deck. He's got some hard removal left.
And we saw a brawl earlier this game go exactly how Pavel needed it. That was exactly the worst case scenario for him there. And he's got to figure out a way to get back into this game, because he's facing down not just a huge threat, but a huge hand of cards with very little remaining in his own tank.
It looks like he's going to try to rely on the Ravaging Pool to trade in, and that hurts.
This is, ooh, though, DrHippi, he is running low in his deck. So if Pavel is able to answer these threats, it could mean that DrHippi goes to fatigue.
And, you know, if Pavel, there are still cards that he has to account for, like Yogg-Saron, but as far as he's concerned, he can sort of count what's up. Oh, wow.
Is he doing it? Oh, dear, Yogg-Saron. Yeah.
Uh-oh, that could go wrong.
No, it goes completely right for DrHippi. And now, ooh. All right, and Yogg's down. Okay, that effectively, Yogg was Starfall. Yogg removed, but that's actually not that bad, because
it's cat trick too.
Yeah, it did play a cat trick as well, and that does protect his Medivh the Guardian from being traded into. So now Pavel's forced to face tank that, take 9 damage.
There's still a Cthulhu in Pavel's deck, but DrHippi is out of cards. His last card is going to be Living Roots.
Can DrHippi do it? He does not have many cards to work with. Can use the Innervate. He's going to dig a little bit into fatigue because of the draw from Azure Drake. Living Roots will take out the Beckoner of Evil. He gets a Wisp. We've had all kinds of stars here on stage for the final so far.
But, I mean, this is it. He can't even play Baron Geddon because that means...
Oh, it's Cthulhu!
And Cthulhu
right
shoot in the
time. Cthulhu destroys DrHippi's board and DrHippi. We're going to game 5. Pavel leads 3-1.
DrHippi tried to rely on Yogg-Saron, but the old god was not having it today, as Pavel takes a decisive lead in the series.
Yeah, we saw
DrHippi.
And DrHippi choosing to play his Warlock deck. This is a matchup that, because of the specific choices Pavel's made in the construction of his rogue deck, can be a little bit tougher than it is for a normal Miracle Rogue.
Oh yeah, definitely. There's Malagos provides you with ways to more effectively beat control decks, but you sacrifice some of the tools that you normally use to beat those faster decks. Sinister Strikes really don't do anything against Zoo Warlocks, Kibler.
If you get low, tapping a lot, you're dead.
Sure, yeah. But in a matchup that comes down to early board control much of the time, Sinister Strikes in your hand, even sometimes Shivs in your hand, Malagos in your hand, are not generally that great.
Crucially for Pavel, he is on the coin and has SI7 Agent. Those are two of the most important cards for the Rogue deck to compete with the early aggression of the Warlock. DrHippi, though, he has a good hand himself.
Yeah, definitely. He's got those early minions. It's hard to not have a good curve a lot of times in Warlock, especially nowadays. It's been so refined and so precise. A lot of Zoo Warlock decks are running more than 10 1-drops nowadays, which means that they're guaranteed to have good starts a lot of the time.
Yeah, and DrHippi, with his 1-drop into that Dark Peddler, trying to decide exactly how he wants to take this on. Argent Squire gives him some resilience. The Runic Egg gives him perhaps some extra gas if he needs it. And Malchezaar's Imp, if he can find one of his cards that synergizes with discarding, could give him a little bit of extra fuel in the tank as well.
Yeah, Malchezaar's Imp, though, is pretty resilient as well as Argent Squire, and it also provides that extra benefit. Out of these three options, I'm looking at Malchezaar's Imp to be one of the best.
I think Imp is particularly attractive. You even have a second copy of Dark Peddler, and you have a Defender of Argus. So the Dark Peddler can get you, say, a Soulfire that can combine with the Imps to both remove something and dig you to gas. The Defender of Argus can pump those up. He picks the Runic Egg, though.
Okay. Well, I guess he does think that he's going to need that gas to get through, but Pavel does have, like you mentioned, on the coin, able to coin out that SI7 agent to deal with the Dark Peddler. He's ahead on board for the time being, which is so crucial in Rogue versus Zoo.
Yeah, and the Dark Peddler for DrHippi finds no Abusive Sergeant, there's no Soulfire. He does not have the ability to answer this SI7 agent right away. No Possessed Villager, so he's gonna have some resilient minions, but we see those two copies of Fan of Knives in Pavel's hand could cause him a lot of trouble.
They could, but one thing is, though, Pavel, as we talked about, has two of those cards that are dead for much of the game in Sinister Strike and Malagos. So a lot of times what happens is rogues can get through that early board, but they can't deal with the second onslaught that Zoo can throw at them. So Pavel's still gonna need a lot of help should he need to win this game. And Fan of Knives will help him get through his deck a little bit. Not only does it act as good removal, but it's also a cycle tool, so he can find those more crucial cards for this matchup.
It's also worth noting that the discard version of Zoo isn't nearly as vulnerable to Fan of Knives as many of the Forbidden Ritual versions that have lots of 1-health minions. Even just looking at DrHippi's hand, there's a 0-2, there's a 1-3, another 1-3, a Death Rattle minion. So Azure Drake for Pavel, that could give spell power that can make those Fan of Knives stronger, but does not help him right now.
Yeah, but it is a minion that he can play on the board. It's also a cycle for his deck. But again, does not help him at the time being. He has to decide how best to do this. I can imagine Fan of Knives is going to come down this turn. Pavel might feel like he needs to play more efficient and Dagger Up, because he still makes sort of similar trades with Fan of Knives and Dagger Up. Dagger Up just also means that he has the Dagger Up for the next turn of Fan of Knives.
Yeah, and Pavel going to go ahead and make those trades. DrHippi with that Runic Egg. It does potentially allow him to get a trade here that draws him a card with Defender of Argus if he wants it. If he does pick up an Abusive Sergeant, obviously he can use that to trade and draw as well, but he is going to go ahead and play the Imp Gang boss he just drew alongside Possessed Villager. Just going to make a board that's actually quite resilient to Fan of Knives.
Yeah, positioning is important here, at least a little bit important here, because of the fact that you can tell he wants to taunt up the Runic Egg, he's just not sure the other way. Putting Possessed Villager on the side also means that your Death Rattles die more conveniently for things like Direwolf Alpha when you want to go outwards in. So definitely DrHippi paying attention to that. Not that it's going to be too crucial in this next turn.
Yeah, but Pavel with that Tomb Pillager off the top, crucially filling out his curve here, allowing him to contest the board with that 5-4. And DrHippi now, Silver Golem was not what he was looking for.
No, not at all. And he was hoping that Pavel wouldn't have Tomb Pillager, because that is a card that can wreak havoc. 4 health can sometimes be a little bit awkward for Zoo Warlocks to deal with unless they have Soulfire, and also it means that they get a coin. So Pavel can leverage that with cards like Gadgeting Auctioneer, with cards like Edwin Van Cleef, or just, you know, being able to use multiple spells. There's
Blood Mage Thalnos, that does enable a spell-powered Fan of Knives right now.
But how effective is that?
Yeah, Hippie's board is not that vulnerable to a Fan of Knives. He has a bunch of 3 health minions right now. And Pavel only able to remove a little bit of damage, so I was gonna say Doomguard with the best draw for Hippie, and it's Doomguard. He has exactly enough mana to play Malchezaar's Imp, Doomguard discarding the Golem, drawing a card. That was a huge draw for DrHippi.
Draw a card, develop a 1/3, a 3/3, and a 5/7 with charge.
No
in
big
the same
deal.
turn.
And DrHippi, though, still taking his time.
Yeah, these are the types of things that, you know, there's so many times where Doomguard won't, you know, discard the cards that you want. And that's the risk that you take when you play the discard Warlock. But this is an incredible
and he draws
hand.
another Doomguard. DrHippi back against the wall. Here it is.
Well, Pavel does have a lot of tools, though, in his hand to deal with a wide board.
Yeah, he does. It's true, but the amount of health on Doomguard makes it terrifying to try and deal with as the rogue. He does have the ability to potentially Shadow Strike it, but if he does attack into the Azure Drake, now Shadow Strike's off the table. So that Doomguard is going to require some actual removal, and it's difficult to deal that much damage in Pavel's shoes. But he does have Blood Mage plus Fan, and with that Shiv picked up, he can actually Blood Mage Fan coin into Shiv, which could take out Doomguard, but would not deal with most of the rest of the board.
Is it better to try and hold on for a Blood Mage double Fan for the following turn? Is there something that Pavel can do to put himself in a good position, but also allow him to have good removal tools for the next turn?
If Pavel does not remove power from this board right now, he is dead. He's facing down that other Doomguard right now. He doesn't know it. We know it, though. And there will be the Fan of Knives. Ooh, the backstab right off of Fan of Knives. Never the timing you want to see it.
What would have been huge there if Pavel were to pick up a preparation, to be able to preparation out the next Fan of Knives, he would have cleared the board in its entirety, because a full board means that Imp Gang Boss doesn't summon the extra Imp. Unfortunately, he doesn't hit it. How much damage is that?
He's got 9 on the board. Doomguard represents 5 more. Gonna go ahead and cycle through that. If he finds Soulfire, not quite.
Quite close, though.
Yeah,
He's got 2 Soulfires left in his deck. No Doomguards now, though. Has 2 Abusive Sergeants, so if something lives, he can use that. But this looks like DrHippi. He smells blood. He's going for it. He's going to trade with the Blood Mage Thalnos to try and get rid of the spell power.
And crucially, Pavel has no healing in his deck. His Malagos deck doesn't play any copies of Earthring Farseer. And he has Sap, but Sap does not do it against Doomguard. It's going to come right back down. He needs Sacrificial Pact off this Swashbuckler. I don't even know if that's enough.
We'll see what he can pick up.
Karakazam, that is not going to do it.
Not quite.
Pavel does not have the tools to get rid of that Doomguard.
He's going to try and survive, but I don't think there's a way that he can do it. He's going to try and draw something, but I don't think there's even a draw in his deck that can save it at this point. Emperor Thorstein's definitely not it, and DrHippi brings himself 1 game closer. Let's see if Pavel can become a world champion, or if DrHippi's going to take this one to a game number 7.
And DrHippi going with his Druid. This is the deck that Pavel feasted on to make his way to the final. He, in 2 straight matches, beat Druid 8 times. 4-0 in both of them when he was on the brink of elimination, and now he just needs to win 1 more to be the world champion.
This is the deck that DrHippi needs to win with right now. This is the wildcard deck for DrHippi that has probably given him the most struggle, and has probably given Pavel the most success when he sees it on the other side, as you mentioned. He does start off with the Swashbuckler. Bite can be a decent removal tools, but you know, this deck isn't really about the minions, so I'm not sure how happy he is with that Swashbuckler pickup.
Bite can be interesting because it does give you tools to deal with Azure Drake later on.
True.
You don't necessarily have to invest actual resources. Getting something off of the Swashbuckler that can deal with that can be pretty big. It can also deal burst damage.
Yeah, true. And I think Pavel is going to breathe a sigh of relief when he sees that DrHippi has missed the wild growth again with this Druid deck. He does have Nourish and he does have Innervate, so he's got plenty of ramp tools along with the Mire Keeper to get him that mana, to get him those cards that he needs. But this turn 2 has sort of been a big whiff for DrHippi in the series.
Yeah, he has definitely struggled with this Druid deck. And now I think he's debating perhaps whether he wants to use his Wrath here, just cycle through, try and find perhaps some actual ramp. He does have the Mire Keeper, and that also the option to potentially Innervate out and Nourish on a future turn as well to get his mana going. But the problem if you do use your Nourish early for ramp, you can run low on cards. But ooh, DrHippi, he is just going to ramp up, get Nourish online, and as we were saying, you know, this can lead you to potentially running low on resources later on, but he's looking to take control of the game with tempo right now.
Yeah, this makes powerful draws from the top of his deck much more powerful because he has the mana to utilize them. He can also keep ramping up with Mire Keeper. He does have Wrath as cycle, but he needs some help. He needs second Nourish. He needs Azure Drake. He needs more tools to increase his hand size.
And we see Pavel pick up a second copy of Sinister Strike. We saw that kind of rotting in his hand last game and mentioned that the sort of greed of this Malagos rogue deck can lead it to have dead cards this stage of the game, and Pavel, he's got both of them in his hand.
Yeah, and I'm interested to see what DrHippi goes for here. Ramp is, you know, the first choice, but is there ever a situation where since you ramped with the Nourish, you create a 2/2 to try and create a
right on time.
Second game in a row.
Pillager for Pavel. It's kind of hanging out in his deck until turn 4.
It's like he's got an agreement with Tomb Pillager to show up on turn 4 in the grand finals, but that is actually quite a crucial draw. DrHippi has ways to deal with it, but those are resources that he otherwise wouldn't have had to spend if DrHippi didn't have it, and Moonfire is not really helping him.
And crucially, that Tomb Pillager, if it dies, will give Pavel a coin. The coin, plus Backstab, even just firing off Sinister Strikes on his own turn, can make a giant Edwin Van Cleef. DrHippi's deck does not have a mulch. He has no way to deal with a huge minion.
Yeah, I mean, DrHippi, I feel like that was a huge risk going with the Nourish for ramp early on in the game. Nourish, a lot of times used for card draw. Maybe DrHippi was afraid that he'd get too far behind if he had to wait that long to get that many cards. But he had the option to Innervate Mire Keeper, which isn't as much ramp, but you're also developing a body. So, I mean, DrHippi taking a risk on the big stage, not paying off yet, but I mean, if he draws into big stuff, he could get a lead in this match.
Yeah, he's got the Feral Rage, gonna go ahead and remove that Tomb Pillager, but as we mentioned, that does give Pavel the ability to have an absolutely explosive turn 5.
All right, well, let's see.
Pavel picks up a Shiv. That he could actually use Backstab plus the Shiv to even power up the Van Cleef a little bit more. It will be Backstab. We know that. That's going to start things off. But exactly how Pavel wants to maneuver, how many of his resources he wants to invest here, because he could use the coin and a Sinister Strike as well.
Oh, he's going for it.
He is going for it. It will be Shiv and Backstab, Sinister Strike. Edwin Van Cleef is coming down, and he is huge. A 10-10. That is a 2-turn clock for DrHippi. He's at 21 life. Just a couple of hits from that will absolutely knock him out of this tournament.
That is so big. Pavel on turn 5 was able to create a 10-10 Van Cleef. DrHippi would need to have sort of the perfect answers here to deal with it. If you count up even all the removal he has in his hand, it's only 9 damage from spells. So he would have to base tank. He actually goes for the draw, but now he just has to rely on this Arcane Giant and hope that Pavel doesn't have a sap to remove it.
But he does. Yep. Pavel actually, he's very, very close to just finishing the game off with Bite plus Sinister Strike as well. He has 7, 8 more damage he can do this turn. He could put DrHippi down to just 3 life, but he can also just sap plus Barnes and all but assure that DrHippi would be dead next turn.
I mean, you saw Pavel, he gave like a big sigh, realizing that he was that close to winning the World Championship. DrHippi's at 11 health, and he saw last turn, he gave away the fact that he had no way to deal with that Edwin Van Cleef. He played the Arcane Giant with the hopes that Pavel wouldn't have a way to answer it. But he does, he's got the perfect answer with the sap.
Yeah.
Buys him 2 turns.
And he doesn't even need 2 turns. He just needs a single window to connect with Edwin Van Cleef one more time.
And he's making sure that he puts on as much damage as possible. So even if DrHippi finds a way to deal with Edwin, it means that he has enough damage in his hand, plus the SI7 agent, to have lethal damage.
DrHippi needs a miracle. He needs Raven Idol swipe. That does not look like he has quite enough. He can take down the Van Cleef, but he has no way to survive the following turn.
Yeah, he can take down the Van Cleef with the spells that he has. I mean, of course, from his perspective, he can survive, but Pavel has Bite. That's 4 damage. He has Sinister Strike, that's 3 damage. He'll have the SI7 agent on the board, that's 3 more. That's plenty of damage to end the game.
And we said Bite looked a little innocuous off the Swashbuckler earlier, but it will be Pavel with that Bite burst. This is the last turn for DrHippi for the World Championship, and this is the last turn before Pavel. He will do it. The Bite, the Sinister Strike, the attack. Pavel is your 2016 Hearthstone World Champion.
1 game away from BlizzCon last year, comes into this year and wins the World Championship.
He took his near miss last year as inspiration, motivation, and it took him all the way to the title, all the way to the trophy. He is now the champion.
What an impressive performance from that young man, and Dan is standing by on stage with our champion.
Congratulations, Pavel. I present to you the 2016 Hearthstone World Champion. You worked hard this entire year, battling out over thousands of people, and now you've won on the biggest stage. What do you have to say to all the fans who are watching around the world?
Thanks everyone for this huge support. I'm really appreciate that. Yeah. Super happy that I win.
I bet you are. What went through your mind during the last few moments of the match?
One more time, please.
Well, definitely a lot of emotions going through everybody's minds. And congratulations again. I want to take this opportunity to present the trophy with President and co-founder of Blizzard Entertainment, Mike Morheim, as well as production director, Jason Chaz.
Pavel, we would like to award you this trophy on behalf of Blizzard Entertainment, on behalf of the entire Hearthstone community. 2016 was an amazing year for Hearthstone esports, and we're incredibly proud to crown you as the new world champion. From everybody at Blizzard and from the millions of Hearthstone fans across the world, congratulations.
This year. We cannot wait to see what's happening in store for 2017. But for now, please join me in one final round of applause for our world champion,